Well, thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Steve Rowen. I am a managing partner at RSR Research based in the United States. And today I am joined by my illustrious partner, Mr. Brian Kilcourse, who also shares the title of managing partner. He and I have been in business since 2007 in our little enterprise here. We've known each other much, much longer. And if you're not familiar with our firm, a very brief background on why we came to be and why we do what we do. First, what do we do? We provide market intelligence to the retail industry. It is our strong belief, when we were first discussing the idea of this company back in 2007, that there are an awful lot of folks in the retail industry who would love to know what's going on, and primarily the resource that they have from a research division or research arm is competitive intelligence, a quadrant, a wave, some way of putting all the technologists in one space in a arena, and then rating who does what, who does best, and then allowing retailers to go find their solutions based on that intelligence. It's done well. We knew we didn't want to do it. We wanted to do something very different. As former retailers ourselves, all of the partners, and at the time there were 4 of us, all came from the retail industry, decided that the one thing we really wished we had instead was market intelligence. What are other retailers doing? What are they doing to deal with the issues of the day? At the time, the smartphone had just come out. What are people going to do with this brand new smart mobile technology? How are they going to respond to customers in kind? And as a result, we launched our company. That was over 15 years ago. And we do this sort of line of inquiry, usually about 10 times a year, and it's topic specific, and it's always about retail. And what we do is we go out and query retailers, ask them, what are your thoughts on any particular topic? Sometimes it's the store, sometimes it's e-commerce. In the context of what we're going to be talking about today, it's artificial intelligence. And we usually get about 100 retailers to respond to us. We then distill that information through the lens of our own experience and present it for free to the entire world. Here is what retailers are saying about X topic at Y point in time. And so today, what I'd like to share with you is the co-author on this particular report is Brian, who we'll meet in just a moment. I'm going to interview Brian about what is it that we both saw in our latest report. And this latest report is on artificial intelligence in retail. We actually titled it Artificial Intelligence in Retail, What Now? And just one more brief bit of backstory here. Typically, when we conduct these lines of inquiry, when we release a benchmark report, it is specific to a topic, not a technology. There have been a few technologies throughout the course of our tenure as a company that have been important enough and disruptive enough to warrant a specific conversation around the technology itself. Mobile was one such discussion. Artificial intelligence has been another. We've been studying this topic for a few years now. And in fact, some of the most interesting things that we saw in this report came in that year-over-year fashion. What did retailers think about AI's possibilities in the supply chain a year ago compared to what did they think about it today? And I think Brian and I haven't completely, nailed this down yet, but this may well be the last time that we look at artificial intelligence as a separate topic. It's become so pervasive throughout all of the things that retailers are asked to do on a daily basis. The products that they're going to design, if they design their own products, those which they're going to sell, the merchandise mix that they have, how they're going to allocate their stores, how they're going to set their pricing for the products that they sell, how they're going to deliver, either directly to the customer or to stores, or some amalgamation of buy online, pick up in store, buy online, pick up at curb, whatever it might be. Artificial intelligence has provided so much value in so many of these areas that next year it will probably be just a part of a line of inquiry in all of those topics as we conduct that research. So with that, I'd like to introduce my business partner, Mr. Brian Kilcourse. Brian, say hello to the folks at home.
How are you? How are you over in Austin, Texas, Steve? Is that right?
I am in Austin. I've lived pretty much everywhere you can in the U.S. And about 4 months ago, I found myself in Austin, Texas. And I got to say, if you've never been here, it's not what you would expect. It is a very strange place, and I love it.
The line from the Lyle Lovett song, that's right, you're not from Texas, but Texas loves you anyway. I'm from
and
California.
Brian, of course, is coming from Northern California. For those of you who don't know Brian, he is a staunch voice of the Northern California lifestyle.
That's right. That's right. Up near Lake Tahoe. and where we really have four seasons. And we're speaking to people across the IORMA globe, mostly in the UK, but we're happy to have a chance to talk to you about this new research piece. So it's exciting stuff. And Steve, you're exactly right. AI is been a topic that we've focused on, particularly because it was introduced to the marketplace as a be-all and cure-all, and we're always very suspicious of those kinds of things. And so we decided to take a look. For everybody's information, the times that we have looked at a technology beyond the, let's call it the line of business use cases for it have been related to the cloud, IoT, location analytics, and AI itself. And they all have something in common, and that is that they are parts of a big digital transformation wave that has hit the industry. As retailers are moving away from their old practices, which were largely based on relatively slow decisioning cycles, to very, very fast decisioning cycles based on what's happening in the marketplace. And so all of these things are kind of related in that interesting way. And they started to get a lot of air in 2015. We started to see a lot of noise or hear a lot of noise about these technologies and AI around 2015 at the NRF show in New York City. But at that time, it was all sizzle. It was a lot of wrapping and no substance. Substance has been building up behind the concept. And so it's exciting, but at the same time, I'm a technologist by practice. And so I want to reiterate something that we've said in our research. It is just a technology. Let's not get too ahead of ourselves. It's a great technology, but it is still just a technology. There was a time when people talked about how relational databases were going to be the be-all and cure-all for every imaginable ill that retailers had. It was a technology, and we made good use of it, but it has its limitations. AI and its related ML also have amazing capabilities and limitations. So we're not expecting killer robots to roam through the stores and shoot our low profitability consumers. We're not expecting any of that kind of stuff. It's much, much more mundane and more interesting, in fact, than that.
Well, it's an interesting point, Brian. You talk about, technologies in a bubble. This particular technology we've been looking at, as you said, since 2015. What are some of the things when you think about when that sizzle became something more valuable? Was there a turning point in there? Was there a time when you thought, okay, the buzz around this has given way to technology that has real value at a practical application level for retailers? And if so, are we there yet?
Good question. Those are two questions. And we first started noticing the practical use cases around AI build up around dynamic demand and supply chain issues. Those two axes, if you will, of inquiry, and they are still very, very real. And as a matter of fact, those issues have only heightened in the last few years. Demand is all over the place. You and I, Steve, are doing another study on the customer experience. And one of the things that we did is we asked consumers what's most important to them. And what we found out is something that we all intuitively know, and that's that consumers will go to the place that offers the best price and the highest availability, period, end of sentence. And so they have the power of this information in their hands at all times. Shopping has become a lifestyle thing, 24/7. And retailers have to respond to the dynamics of this new demand face, if you will. On the flip side, supply chains, as we all know, are completely messed up. And people who think that it is better haven't been paying attention. It's just not as bad as it was last year. The thing we talk about in the office, of course, is that the two words, supply chain, have become a dinner conversation. Now, I spent most of my life on some aspect of supply chain automation because that's what retailers do. And I will tell you, it's the inside game of retail. It's not the kind of stuff that you discuss with your wife and kids around the dinner table. And yet, there we are. That's exactly what's happened.
Yeah, who would have thunk that, right?
Nobody would have thought that. So the first part of your question is, what are the drivers? Those are the two things that have really made it practical, because there's a lot of new information coming out from the world of demand, from the demand ecosystem, and there's a lot of new information coming out from the supply ecosystem. And that information is not transactional. It's not purchase orders and invoices and the advanced ship notices and those kinds of things. It's signals of one kind or another. On the consumer side, the signals are coming directly from the digital selling channels, and they're offering retailers a lot of clues. There's so much data that it's impossible to consume without the kind of capabilities that AI has to offer. Now, why would retailers care? They never cared before. How many times have you heard this, Steve, right? I've been running my stores for 30 years and I never needed this before. Why do I need it now? And the answer is because the space between something happening and your reaction to it has got to get very small. It used to be relatively big. Next week, next quarter, next year. Right. Now you need to fix something in almost real time when there's an interruption in either demand or in supply.
So the challenges that are created, in the modern era are pretty obvious. Were there any surprises that you saw within? So for those of you unaware, again, who have not read an RSR report, we look at all of these topics, whatever they might be, through the lens of a framework that we call the BOOT. And like everything else in the retail industry, it's an acronym. And the B stands for business challenges. The business challenges, I would imagine, obviously having been a co-author of this report, I have a little bit of insight into what some of the business challenges might have been. But the amount of data that retailers are collecting from consumers, that, as to the point you just made, that they've never done before, is that really the largest challenge facing them right now as they try to become, more relevant than their competitors are? Is that number one?
Well, it's different depending on whether you're an overperformer or everybody else. So we call overperformers retail winners, and our criteria is pretty simple. They overperform the market. Retail winners are worried about just supply chain disruptions. They want to be able to respond very, very quickly. Now, this gets very complicated real fast, so let's not go down that rabbit hole just yet. And let's talk about what everybody else is worried about. Everybody else is worried about sudden changes in consumer demand. So retail winners are not as concerned about that because they are already on top of the issue. Average and underperformers are buffeted by what they see as almost pernicious changes in consumer demand. Retail winners are very concerned about the supply chain. Now, this brings us to where the complication gets in. There's been a lot of talk about personalization of the offer, and we've written a lot about that, hundreds of pages, in fact, over the last several years. I think the first time in RSR world that we mentioned personalization of the value proposition was in the first year we were in existence, 2008. We've been writing about it for a long time. We also know from this customer experience survey that we're working on that personalization isn't true one-to-one, but it does mean a different type of segmentation, a different type of optimization of the assortment, optimization of price, and even promo. All of these things are creating many more decision points for retailers, many different levels of complexity that didn't exist before. In my day, you had a uniform assortment. You might have 6 model stores like we did, and you assorted to those stores and you allocated and replenished accordingly. But basically, it was a one-size-fits-all retail model. One size fits all doesn't work for most companies anymore. And this complicates the supply chain. So you have 2 things going on there. You have an attempt to localize the value proposition to keep in line with what consumer expectations are, but you have to supply that, maintaining your gross margin in the same way you used to do, but with more variation. And this creates the need for much faster decision making, which is where AI comes in.
I'll do something that you and I tend not to do other than in our most informal conversations. How are they doing at it?
I think the polite way we say it in our research, it's still very early days.
Yes. I think that is the most polite way to tiptoe around that one. It is early days.
It is very early days. And I think if I can find some data here, Steve, I'll read it back to you. But they're just in the earliest days of adoption, and So we asked retailers, what is your company's current level of experience when it comes to AI-enabled analytics? Very straightforward question. And remember, winners versus everybody else. The top-rated thing It was open-ended. The top rated thing by 27% of retail winners. So just a little bit over a quarter is that we have multiple mature AI-enabled analytics projects, and we use them to drive capabilities that differentiate. 27%. The next one
I'll
is
just remind everyone, the definition of winners that we utilize is based on current sales, and we ask retailers to self-identify.
Yeah.
What you might think is that some retailers try to game the system, and what we find really quickly is when you're asking a series of questions in rapid succession, the truth shakes out really quickly. Retail winners truly are the people who are performing better in comparable sales, whether it's at the store, whether it's online, whether it's a mix of the two. And they tend to do things very, very differently. And that line of inquiry exposes itself further out when we ask things like this about how far might you be with insert technology here. And as Brian just said, those who are already doing better, far further down the road with analytics capabilities as it relates to AI.
Well, let's put a number to that, Steve. On this point that I made about multiple mature analytics projects, 27% of overperformers, 8% of everybody else. Right. This gives you a sense of where they are. Now, where are they? Where are they spending their time in AI in the adoption cycle? 25% of winners say they have a comprehensive strategy ready to go. 19% of everybody else. And then there's some agreement in the next one is we're undergoing an education about the possibilities, hopefully by reading RSR reports.
Hopefully by reading RSR reports and getting as much education at as many shows and through IORMA podcasts as possible.
It's possible. Now, interestingly, there are 17% of average and underperformers who just aren't doing anything. Right. So this is very early days. That's probably the nicest way I can say.
Is that number lower, that 17% of the average and underperformers who say they're not doing anything, is that number slightly lower for those who are already doing better in their sales?
For the people who are doing better, the overperformers, it's 4%. So there's a big difference. Yeah.
That is a very low, that's an interesting point to make. It's better to be doing something than nothing at this point, even if that something is just learning what you can be doing in the future.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Yeah. So when you think about these challenges, Brian, and you and I have been doing this long enough to know that there are people who look at challenges and get frozen and say, oh my gosh, there's nothing I could do. I might as well just sit on my hands. And we all know how they tend to fare in this world. There are those who look at challenges and say, okay, this is the world as I see it. This is reality as it's coming down the pike. What can I do to prepare myself? And if I am to leverage these technologies that exist in spades, because you and I know we go to enough events and we have enough conversations with the vendor community, a lot of these technologies are ready to be used. The question is, are retailers prepared organizationally, with the amount of budget required, with everything that goes into rolling in a brand new way of conducting your business? What are some of the opportunities they see of why they would even do this?
Well, this is interesting. That's a good question, Steve. I'd like to note here that in our reports, one of the things we discover over and over again is that retail winners are very good at turning a challenge into an opportunity. So, for example, if they're challenged by ever-changing and very dynamic demand profiles, they're good at responding quickly to it, and that response creates a competitive differentiator. So we see this all the time. It's fascinating to look at, and in fact, most of our recommendations are based on that. But here's an interesting thing: when it comes to AI-enabled analytics in the business, retail winners and everybody else are almost in complete agreement about what the priorities ought to be.
That is interesting.
And it really is fascinating. The first one is to improve reaction to supply chain shocks. This gets to what I was just talking about. There's a supply chain of interruption in some place, and they want to be able to find an alternate path to get to the products that they need. Number two, was right behind it was there's agreement that they need to be able to respond more quickly to sudden shifts in consumer demand. Now,
those go hand in glove, don't they?
They sure do. Supply and demand. Then it gets down to a little bit of difference of opinion, but not great. More intelligent allocation and optimization of products based on consumer insights. This gets to that, if you will, localization of the offer, ability to test and impact the proposed decisions on the business before you actually implement those decisions. And finally, better what-if capabilities, which kind of goes hand in hand. So what retailers are telling us, supply chain is number one, consumer demand is number two, and the ability to model decisions that they're making in the lab, if you will, before they put them out into the wild. And this is very important stuff.
That is very important stuff. And it's something that, as I mentioned at the top here, you and I do a number of these every year. And one of the things that we're always kind of encouraged to see is when retailers are honest and say, we know what we don't know. We're actively seeking help from the technology community. And the one thing we know for sure is we're not just going to buy wholesale into somebody's pitch, right? We're going to test this stuff. And if we can, model what the outcome will be before we go wholeheartedly into it. That's very different than a lot of the ways that technologists got, quote unquote, burned by just buying into concepts at the beginning part of the millennium. And you remember that probably as well as anybody. It was, we're all going to run towards CRM right now, and everyone ran towards it. It didn't work out. It's a shame when you see these sort of after effects and this, I don't want to say distrust, but a certain measure of healthful skepticism on the part of retailers when technologists come knocking at their door and say, this time we really have technology that does what it says it can do. Is this that case? Is this a case where the technology is more advanced than the skepticism deserves?
The technology is far advanced. What retailers are talking about doing with it is relatively, I don't want to say mundane, because it's fascinating. It's exciting stuff, but we're not curing cancer with this stuff. We're just trying to anticipate demand. Yeah, and let's go back to what AI is really good at. Its most basic capability is it can look at a vat of unstructured data, and it can find statistical relationships, correlations between those data that might turn out to be interesting to you. So basically, it's just looking at this big, vast ocean of data that's being collected from signaling devices throughout the entire enterprise. And it says, hey, there's a relationship between a sudden drop in toothpaste and something that happened over here. Maybe you should look at that.
Right.
And that is really great if it happens fast enough. And ML, its companion technology, is all about algorithms that improve themselves over time. So that enables more automated decision making. And as you go back to what I was saying about localization of the offer, you start to go from hundreds or thousands of decision points to literally millions. And you can't possibly keep track of all those things, quickly or slowly or at all. Right. So AI and its companion ML allow you to make a decision. Now, what kind of a decision would be a good one to make? What happens if you, for example, have noticed that you are getting beat on price on a key item by a very large competitor that happens to be in Bentonville, Arkansas? What should your response be? You can do that manually, and it might take a few weeks to get there, or you can trigger an automated response to that.
So when you think about everything that you just said, what does that mean from a personnel point of view for a retailer? And again, it's going to be a very different answer if you're Target or Walmart than it is if you're a fashion retailer with $600 million annual revenue. But is there some sort of uniform response on the part of retailers, at least in this research, on what they think organizationally they need to do in order to prepare themselves to make use of this information?
It's a great question. So we asked them what the things that stand in the way. We call those organizational inhibitors. And the number one thing that jumped up, and it actually went up from the last study we had done on it, is that they have a limited understanding of how to practically use all of the new data that is being targeted by AI solutions, such as search engines, paid advertising, social media, Internet of Things, et cetera. They're just still trying to get their arms around what all this data is and what the implications of it is. Secondarily, they're saying their IT department is not equipped for all of these new complex analysis tools. And the third one is kind of the bogeyman we see all the time, is it's hard to quantify the ROI. We'll talk about that if you'd like, but those are the top three. And what we have gleaned from our research here is that the best way to start to get over these things is to run pilot programs that demonstrate the value. Don't start with a grand scheme, but start picking on those things that are the most pressing issues for your business and start running pilots against it to see if simply to improve your response time. Right behind that, however, is what I would characterize as the democratization of the technology. AI is math. It's not for the faint of heart. It's not for, brown bear retailers like me. It's for actually, PhD type people who have gotten advanced degrees in math. The algorithms that are used that are called models, by the way, in AI are very, very complex algorithms. The capabilities have to be brought down to street level so that mortals like me can understand them. And one of the ways that we've seen that retail winners are very good at is creating highly visual presentations of the analytics to those decision makers. So there's a couple of things that they can do. The other one that comes with it sounds kind of trite and silly, but whatever you do in presenting the results of analytics, make sure it shows up well on the iPhone.
Yeah, it's an interesting catch. And if anyone had read one of the early reports we've done this year about key performance indicators, it was actually the very first time we had attempted to study that topic with retailers. How have KPIs changed? What do you need that you're not getting? What could technologists do to make your life easier? And the number one thing that came out of that report was take really complicated information, make it actionable to the business user at the highest level, the C level, and make it absolutely 100% actionable from a mobile phone. And I think you and I knew that intuitively, but to see that come out so far ahead as people are making decisions in the back of Ubers while they're waiting for airplanes. These are big decisions with an enormous amount of mathematics behind them. Just make it simple. I think that was somewhat surprising to us how loudly retailers echoed that back at us.
Well, let me tell an anecdote to kind of highlight this. I implemented a data warehouse in 1990 at my company. Data warehouses in those days were very new.
Sure.
And it was one of those perilous decisions I made. I thought I'm either going to be a hero or I'm going to get fired. And I don't know when it is.
It's going to have a resounding effect one way or another, right?
Yeah. So we were looking for desktop tool sets that executives could use, and one vendor came in with a solution that would allow executives to create pivot tables. And those of you who've used Excel spreadsheets know what a pivot table is. Generating hundreds or thousands of lines of little tidbits of data, which mostly are useless, but occasionally useful. And I just said, no, we're not going to do that. And the guy said, why not? I said, have you ever spent any time with an executive? And he said, well, you're an executive. I said, I'm an IT guy. I don't count.
Yeah. Disguised.
I said, executives will make multi-million-dollar decisions affecting thousands of employees or hundreds of thousands of customers based on something that was given to them on a Post-it note as they walked into a meeting. Yeah. That's an executive's existence. They're making big and momentous decisions that affect a lot of people and have a lot of outcomes, some good and some bad, based on very, very little and highly summarized information. That's their life. That's how they live. And so when you're showing the results of these very complicated analytics, don't show them the algorithm. Show them the result and make it visual and make it easy for them to consume in the way they have already told us abundantly that they want to consume it, which is on their iPhone.
Yeah, it's a fascinating anecdote. You and I were talking just the other day. I was at an event not too long ago, and the CEO of a very large US-based, mall-based retailer got up to give his presentation. And the thing that he was probably most surprised by was that he's been elevated to C-level because he was an IT guy as well. And the thought process behind that whole escalation was, with all of these technological inputs coming, maybe we need a tech guy making those decisions. Maybe we don't need a quote unquote business guy reading off those Post-its. And I got to say, it's working out well for them. I would imagine we'll see more of that going forward. Well,
tech savvy is an important thing. As I said at the beginning of this, AI and other technologies are all part of a digital transformation where business leaders are understanding that information, insights derived from that information are strategic in nature. They're not just tactical. So as you move to optimize your business in the context of the new world that we all live in, where consumers are empowered with tremendous information and the power that goes with that information, it pays to be tech savvy or information savvy, more specifically. What are the strategic capabilities of using information? We've seen this now since the advent of point of sale back in the mid 1980s. That those retailers that embrace the strategic and competitive value of information are today's winners. And the next generation of winners are ones that are seeing the new strategic imperatives behind information. That's why this is all part of a big digital transformation effort.
Right. And that will be the next topic that you and I undertake as we head into 2023. There will be a heavy focus on digital transformation as the umbrella under which a lot of this falls. Before we part ways here, Brian, is there anything from, I know, it's interesting to have a technology enablers section of a report that's specific to AI. But when you think about AI, when you think about the conundrum that retailers are in right now, where they're so far behind, part of the job that you and I have to do is not beat up on people, is to be empathetic, right? We're former retailers, we recognize how we've all gotten into this situation. But the technology has evolved so much faster than the adoption, particularly in our industry, right? Other industries have done a slightly better job of keeping pace. If you were talking to a retailer today and they were asking you about artificial intelligence, is there one particular area where I should be looking at this technology and how it can help? Is your answer supply chain? Is your answer somewhat narrower than that? Based particularly off this research, where would your answer lie?
It's a tough question. The two areas, of course, where I'd focus are right where we started. It's on being able to detect the supply chain disruption in a quick enough time to be able to respond to it. So I would recommend that retailers take a look at those things that happen in their supply chain that are causing them most grief. Where are the breakdowns? And then to ask yourself the question, what could new information and new analytics bring to the table that would help us to move past those disruptions? Now, disruptions happen all the time. Your supply chain professionals see this and they manage this day in and day out. So just come up with a pick list. What are the top 10 things that drive us nuts? And then see what you would have to do. Now, kind of the central to that notion is your visibility into inventory, no matter where it is in your ecosystem. And this is a much, much bigger issue. As you know, Steve, we've studied this again since 2007. And since 2007, we've been saying that real-time 100% visibility into inventory throughout the entire enterprise is a must. Now, that's a very hard thing to achieve for a lot of reasons. Yeah. But retailers need to address those areas where it breaks down and do what they can to correct it. So that would be on the supply chain side. On the demand side, there is a world of new information that you can pay attention to. There's weather, psychographics, demographics, calendars. For example, is there a big sporting event in town? But of all the ones that I would focus on competitive information first. Because remember what consumers told us. What they care about more than anything else is price and availability, and they have this lovely little kiosk that they carry around with them all the time.
I've never heard it called a kiosk. I like that.
It is. It's a very small one, but it does.
Right. Take this big thing that's been bolted to the floor, and all of a sudden,
there it is, and it's accurate and it's real time. So I would focus on competitive intelligence first. And part of that, unfortunately, we saw in this, not this study this year, but in one a couple of years ago, is that many retailers are still grappling to understand what they did with their own internal promotions. So what was the promotional effect of putting something at discount in their own enterprise? So retailers need to understand their own promotional history so that they can compare to what consumers, or not consumers, but what competitors are doing. So those are the two areas I'd focus on right away. Both of them have a lot to do with cleaning up your internal data first.
Yes, they do. Yeah. It's an interesting, I mean, if I could summarize that quickly, for a large part of what we unearth here at RSR is on the retail side of the house. And a lot of it has to do, almost all of it has to do with the ability to trust the data that you have incoming in order to know what has happened. Brian's first point, understanding those shocks in the supply chain, you might not have the ability to do an awful lot about some of them, particularly if they're well out of your reach and overseas and at scale and affecting, retailers large and small. But you damn well better know what's happening and have a course of action that you can adjust. Because the other side of inquiry that we've really sort of just started in on is asking customers directly the inverse side of a lot of these questions. And if you come to our website, it's a shameless plug, I know, but we have some data that's coming out very soon around the customer experience, where we do something very similar to what we did here with AI, which is ask retailers, what do you think goes into a great customer experience? And then we flip around and ask consumers, what do you think goes into a great customer experience? We haven't even released that data yet, but likely by the time this publishes, it will be available. And it's quite interesting. And I imagine as we go forward in the years to come, we'll do a lot more of that, because there does tend to be this sort of he said, she said around everything. Because although we're all in the industry, we're all also consumers as well. And those are two very interesting things to sort of hold in both sides of your mind at the same time. So unless I missed anything here, Brian, in our conversation, I'd like to thank you. This has been interesting for me, even though we co-authored this report together. I feel like I learned a little something here today.
Well,
and hopefully you enjoyed your time as well.
Yeah, well, of course, I love this stuff. I get very excited about it. A couple things I'm going to say. First of all, remember that our research is free, and we do not sell your name. So it is a perfectly safe and sane place to spend your time. We love your feedback. But to all the decision makers who might be listening to this, my last message to you is my first. This is just technology. It will not cure world hunger. It will not find the cure for cancer. It won't create peace in the Ukraine. It's a technology. It happens to be the latest and greatest technology that we have to consume data, but don't be afraid of it. It's just technology. It's doing good things for good people.
Excellent. Doing good things for good people. I like that. All right. Well, with that, I'd like to thank everyone for your time. Again, Steve Rowen, Brian Kilcourse, RSR Research. Please feel free to reach out to us. Our website is rsrresearch.com. You end up with back-to-back R's in there. And this is the kind of thing we do, and we really enjoy doing it. So we hope this has been valuable to you, and enjoy the rest of your day.